I knew something was wrong. Something happened to her.
Her killer thought he was gonna get away with it.
He formulated a plan, like some sort of Vegas magic act. He made the body disappear.
It's like finding a needle in a haystack. There's such a vast expanse of where it could be.
No one would have believed that anyone would have gone to such lengths to hide a body.
On May 31st, 2019, Esmeralda Gonzalez was reported missing to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Esmeralda was last seen by her family on May 26, 2019. After 2 days, her brother responded to Esmeralda's address to check up on her. When he got there, he found her not there.
Her brother called me and told me that she's missing. I was in denial. Esmeralda was a very driven young woman. She was born in Mexico and she came to Las Vegas at a very young age. And she was able to finish up college. She bought her first house. She ended up buying a second house and turned it into a rental property. She became Instagram famous. She had thousands and thousands of followers. Why would this girl who was 100% independent go missing when I knew something was wrong?
Her family told us Esmeralda was living in a pretty nice neighborhood and making pretty good money. But we found she suffered from mental health problems.
When she was on her medication, she was fine. But if the medication stopped working for her, then she would have episodes.
A week before she went missing, her brother called me and he told me that her mental disorder is acting up again and something's going on with her medicine.
My news assignment editor said there's this report of a missing Latina. She was in a very, very fragile state of mind. To me, it hit home a little more for the simple fact that her parents had come to the United States for the same reason my parents came here. Her family just wanted a better life. That just makes you feel sick to your stomach.
What was her mental state? Is that the reason why something happened to her? I didn't know how to react. It was all like a complete mystery. What really happened?
For me, all cases are kind of like a puzzle. When the police detectives first came and spoke to us about the case, they described it as a missing persons case, but there's no indication really that anything criminal has happened to her.
We went to Esmeralda's house to see if the disappearance was a result of something that happened there.
There wasn't a lot of disturbance at her house, but she left her phone. Her car was there.
We did find that she had video cameras on her door and within the house as well. And we're able to obtain video footage from the cameras in Esmeralda's house. This video footage shows her behavior around her house in the days leading up to her disappearance.
Hey, babe. I'm really freaked out because I can feel my teeth, they're all loose.
She's acting erratic, strange. She's heard muttering nonsense phrases.
Why are you mad at me? What did I do?
And jumping at nothing.
You can see that Esmeralda is essentially not in her right mind during that period of time. Even though she's clearly having kind of a mental breakdown. Nothing in the house ends up helping as far as where she went.
The fact that she left items that could be tracked, her cell phone, her debit card, credit cards, and even her vehicle at her residence, questions also arise on whether or not she's trying to escape from someone. We conducted interviews with family members and other friends that showed that Esmeralda had a boyfriend, John.
The last time that I seen her, 6 to 8 weeks before she went missing, I went to her house and she instantly stopped me and she said, "You cannot come in here. I have a new man. He's extremely jealous. He's controlling. He watches my cameras. He doesn't want you around here." I was like, this is very odd.
We look into John to see what his criminal history was and discovered that there had been a report of a domestic dispute between Esmeralda and John on the 29th of May. She is ultimately reported as missing on the 31st. So we become concerned.
John ends up being rather forthcoming with information in his own whereabouts. He turns over a cell phone. He allows detectives to essentially go through social media, stuff like that.
We used cell phone records with location data to determine that John was not with Esmeralda since May 29th, in the days leading up to her disappearance.
At that point in time, we don't have enough to move on John.
The missing persons unit then did a canvass of the neighborhood where Esmeralda lived. They contacted several neighbors. A lot of people have Ring doorbells that capture video, not only at their front porch or sometimes even out in the front yard or the street.
One of the neighbors says, "Oh, hey, I have video footage of a girl knocking on my door."
We did retrieve that security footage. They're kind of taken aback. The video footage showed Esmeralda dressed in her lingerie and high heels. She appears very confused. When a person is reported missing and you know that they have a history of mental illness, then we do become concerned about their welfare. The fear would be that they could become a danger to themselves or a danger to someone else in the community. The longer a missing person goes missing, the colder the case gets, the harder it is to put things together. But now we have a question: what has happened to her?
Oh, I do? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And you can see at 2:33 a.m. time frame is the last time she can be seen alive when she's walking down the street.
Where did she go? She's leaving on her own volition from her house, but her behavior is very erratic, and she just disappears from that moment. We were concerned, will this missing persons investigation ultimately become a homicide investigation?
When people are missing for us for a certain amount of time, we assume it's going to ultimately end in a homicide case. But we need a body. Without a body, you have trouble proving that someone's dead or that a crime has occurred.
It's frustrating because you kind of know that Esmeralda's family must be suffering. I mean, this family wants some closure, and we can't give it because we can't definitively say what happened. We can't essentially tell that family to give up hope.
The hardest part is just not knowing what really happened. I was afraid somebody was doing harm to her. And then you're just searching all over town, going everywhere that you know that she normally goes, where she gets her nails done, the gas station, is all her friends and family. You're going everywhere you can think that she possibly went to, putting flyers up all over town.
Then, approximately 6 weeks later, on July 18th, 2019, Metro PD's homicide unit receives an anonymous tip via a phone call.
The information in the anonymous tip was that a prostitute came to be in the company of a person called Christopher Prestopino, and that she had been held against her will for a couple of days and was ultimately murdered by Christopher Prestopino.
We had doubts about whether or not Esmeralda is the girl that was discussed in the tip. However, that gets me interested. This was the first real significant break in this investigation. And the investigation is turned upside down. There was investigation done into what was going on in Esmeralda's social life, given that she was a social media influencer.
But we learned she had ties to quasi-adult entertainment.
She worked as one of those showgirls on the strip where you wear the feathers and you take pictures with tourists. And I told her that it was not safe. Like you don't have security. You're vulnerable. So she agreed that she would work at a gentleman's club. And she worked and saved every penny she possibly could. And that's why she was able to be successful and invest in real estate.
There were definitely adult entertainment aspects of her life, kind of loosely fitting what the anonymous tipster had said. So it seemed like a pretty valid tip, but for us as prosecutors, we need a crime scene or we need a body. I mean, we need something to go on if we're going to charge a homicide, much more than this person is missing.
The first thing done with this information is try to identify the person named in the tip. In this case, they were able to identify Christopher Prestopino because his last name is very unusual.
We learn that Christopher worked here in Las Vegas. He dealt with production lighting.
He was sort of a behind-the-scenes worker, and they're able to find out that around the time Esmeralda goes missing, he doesn't show up for work, which is unusual for him.
He had a criminal history involving possession and sales of narcotics.
But based on what I saw on social media, this guy was perverted. He had so many posts, inappropriate posts about women, things he would do to women. I remember seeing that he liked a lot of nasty groups on Facebook. He was a sicko walking around in our community. He was a predator.
I never met this guy, but there's so many thoughts going through your mind. You can't help but to think, are these things connected?
Was there some connection between Esmeralda Gonzalez and Christopher Prestopino?
Detectives were looking for a connection between Esmeralda Gonzalez and Christopher Prestopino. We map out Esmeralda's address and Christopher's address and find that they are less than 1/10 of a mile apart. The street that Prestopino's cul-de-sac empties out onto is in fact the same street that Esmeralda is seen walking towards when she leaves that neighbor's house at 2:30 a.m. on May 31st.
Because of the proximity of Esmeralda Gonzalez's house and also kind of the description of her loosely fitting what the anonymous tipster had said, we were able to put together that she was likely the person in the anonymous tip.
Up until this moment, there has been a bunch of dead ends in the Esmeralda Gonzalez investigation. Now it seems that there's been a huge break in the case.
Christopher Prestopino ends up being the suspect. Prestopino is playing game of cat and mouse. If you don't have a body, one of the main elements of a human being being killed, you have to prove murder through at least circumstantial evidence.
We subpoenaed Christopher's banking records, and we could see where his card was used.
We pulled the video surveillance. You see trips to the hardware store. The hardware purchases start occurring on June 2nd after Esmeralda went missing.
All of the purchases were highly suspicious, like a rope and cement and wheelbarrow and all these things that you would need in order to move a body. But all of the little pieces of evidence is circumstantial evidence. So it was helpful, but not definitive that a crime has occurred.
We also learn Christopher Prestopino does 3 different truck rentals from June 8th to June 10th.
Esmeralda is reported missing on the 31st. If Christopher Prestopino did kill Esmeralda and did not dispose of the body until the 10th, he had a long period of time to formulate and enact a plan to dispose of that body.
There's like 200 miles put on the rental truck, but Las Vegas, there's a lot of desert surrounding it. There's such a vast expanse of where the remains of Esmeralda Gonzalez could be, but we needed to try to piece together where she was. So it's like finding a needle in a haystack.
If he killed Esmeralda, I think Prestopino thinks he can outsmart detectives, because if you don't have a body, we can't just go arrest him. If he's playing game of cat and mouse, you got to keep going. Now, this is roughly in this August to September time period. We get the cell phone records of Prestopino, and a number is called really frequently during this May 31st to, let's say, June 10th timeframe. And Cassandra Garrett is the name of the person who's using this other phone. So detectives start following up on that.
Cassandra was kind of a drifter. She lived in various places in Las Vegas, sometimes not staying in one place too long. Cassandra's cell phone is tracked. Sometime in the evening of June 10th, Cassandra leaves Las Vegas. Cassandra ultimately ends up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
We were really trying to get as much evidence as possible. There's a little bit of strategy to that. We don't want to talk to Christopher because then obviously he realizes that he is being looked at for a homicide. But we needed something, so the detectives traveled to Milwaukee to speak with Cassandra Garrett to see if she would talk about anything that happened in Las Vegas.
Detectives respond to Milwaukee to interview Cassandra Garrett. We know that Cassandra and our suspect, Christopher Prestopino, were friends. So it's very important to speak with her to see what her involvement was.
So my partner and I, we've been assigned to conduct a follow-up investigation into a missing person case out of Las Vegas.
Okay.
So where have you stayed in Vegas?
Stayed with, I got Andreas. I stayed with, hold on.
When did you stay with Chris? Which Chris are we talking about? Prestopino?
Yeah. I guess I was the first, yeah, something like that.
You stayed with Chris at his house?
Uh-huh. So that's why I don't understand why you're here.
Yeah.
He said something about something missing, but I don't understand who's missing. But what's going on with that?
Okay, so when you were at Chris's house, did anything happen at Chris's house that was unique? Did Chris have to rent a truck for any?
I don't know. How would I know that?
You were there. You stayed there.
Well, I know I did. I was hardly ever. I come and I go. Okay. I don't know. That's the truth.
She basically tells them to pound sand and doesn't really give them much to follow up on.
She's not too forthcoming. So it's really challenging. I think Christopher Prestopino was clearly involved in Esmeralda's disappearance, but we didn't have anything else to go on.
But we do become concerned if he and Cassandra begin discussing the case, they may start covering up their crime and disposing of the evidence.
We had to figure out where the crime scene is. So we got search warrants served in Christopher Prestopino's house in order to find more evidence that would substantiate a homicide and help us find Esmeralda's body.
This search was conducted on September 20th. SWAT is used in these circumstances is because the subject matter of the investigation is a violent act where someone is ultimately killed.
When the detectives served the search warrant, Christopher Prestopino was home and cooperated with the police. When the detectives showed Mr. Prestopino a picture of Esmeralda Gonzalez, and he denied ever seeing her or ever meeting her. So we searched his residence. There wasn't a whole lot of evidence that indicated violence in the house. There wasn't an obvious weapon. There wasn't blood. But there were things that suggested that something could have happened in the house. The garage floor was redone. There were new carpets. Those things would be consistent with someone who's trying to hide evidence of a crime. But there's no way to say that something bad happened to her in the house. We were concerned, if we never find this body, are we going to be able to put a case on?
Maybe Prestopino thinks he can outsmart everyone, but we didn't stop.
Several months into the investigation, a witness comes forward, and it was pretty big. One of Cassandra Garrett's friends ends up talking to us. According to the friend, Cassandra had talked about this young woman being tied up in the house of Prestopino for several days, that she was drugged and that she was prevented from leaving the house.
And so because of that, we decided to take another run at Cassandra.
We told her that if she did tell us what happened to Esmeralda, that her liability would be lessened. If she could implicate someone else versus having most of the responsibility laid at her doorstep,
Cassandra decided that she would cooperate with the detectives' investigation. And Cassandra agreed to come back to Las Vegas from Wisconsin on October 4th. She admitted that she was with Christopher when they dumped the body. Then she led the detectives to a remote desert area, approximately 47 miles north of Las Vegas.
And once they got out to that desert location, what we found was really shocking.
Early October, Pam and I are alerted, hey, the body's likely been found. It's a tomb. And Cassandra Garrett ends up being the person who shows us where the body is entombed and disposed of in the middle of the desert. It's so heavy. A tow truck with kind of a crane gets out in the middle of the desert. It picks up the tomb and it's brought back to the CSI lab here in Las Vegas.
They had to drill it open, and it was a really, really heavy structure.
They're able to find portions of bones, and there is a watch that Esmeralda was wearing in some of her social media posts that is in that tomb that she was buried with. And so that's one of the initial ways that she's identified, but eventually DNA confirms that's Esmeralda's body. It was shock, but kind of awe in the sense of, hey, someone really built this thing. The amount of thought that it took to essentially enclose this into a tomb, no one would have believed that anyone would have gone to such lengths to hide a body.
Prosecutors suspect that a body that was recently found in the desert is missing woman, 24-year-old Esmeralda Gonzalez.
Detectives located it in the desert, encased in a homemade concrete and a wooden structure.
Just remember when her friend called me and told me they ended up killing her, I was actually mentally prepared for it when they did find her. The story was all over the news, like you couldn't even get away from it. I try not to hear all the details. If I hear the details, like I can imagine exactly how she would react, and that type of thought just kind of like sticks in your mind, so I just try not to hear the specifics. I was in complete shock.
So that's the point in time when you can go forward with an arrest warrant for Christopher Prestopino. Detectives become aware that he is going to fly back from vacation on this flight. It's going to land here in McCarran Airport. I'm at the airport with the detectives. Detectives circle around him, hook him under each arm. We say, we found the body. Prestopino goes limp and kind of collapses into the arms of the detectives.
He is arrested at that point, but he obtained counsel and he refused to talk.
It's then that Cassandra lays out actually what occurred on May 31st in those early morning hours.
In one voluntary statement under LVMPD event, somebody given a statement is Cassandra Garrett. All right, so my partner and I, we're just go back. So we're still following up on the death of Esmeralda Gonzalez. And so now we're just here to talk to you a little bit more about that. Okay, so now what do you remember about her coming over to Chris's house?
He called me over to come over and drove over there.
Cassandra said she and Christopher were at Christopher's house the night of May 30th into the morning of May 31st.
Esmeralda is in lingerie, walking down the street. That street leads real close to Christopher Prestopino's house.
She was walking around knocking on people's doors, and this guy took advantage of the situation.
Esmeralda was having a mental health episode, but I think he probably thought we can party with her and have sex with her.
They were like having fun or whatever.
So something happened, right?
Yeah, well, till something happened, I don't know. I come out and he's upset. He's pacing. He's like, she won't shut up. She won't shut up. And she's like talking all kinds of shit. Like, he said that she won't stop talking. She won't stop talking. She won't stop. And he's like, she knows too much. I'm like, what are you talking about? She knows too much. He just said that she knows too much and she can't leave. And I'm like, huh? I'm like, what does she know? And he did have her handcuffed to the stripper pole.
Christopher appears to become kind of paranoid.
I said, Kristen, just let her go. I said, just let her go. But she kept talking. She just wouldn't stop talking.
So they make the determination to kill her. He starts beating on Esmeralda and chokes her out.
And he got me shot or something. I don't know. It's like, I don't know what kind of, it's like a regular needle. It's not like a needle.
It's not like a little heroin one. It's
like a long needle with a tube. It happened so fast, and I don't know. I think he just like drugged her, or I don't know. He just, I don't know if it was an arm or a leg. I don't know. He just shot it in her.
Christopher then injects Esmeralda with muriatic acid, which is used in cleaning swimming pools, which ultimately kills Esmeralda. And he's trying to use that to throw the investigators off the scent in the disposal of the body.
Christopher then built an entire tomb full of concrete with various screws and jacks. He actually entombs that body.
Ultimately, Christopher and Cassandra drove the rented moving truck with the concrete in the back to an area approximately 47 miles north of Las Vegas and were able to dump the complete structure, wood, concrete, and all out of the back of the truck into a remote desert area.
There's like a point of really dehumanizing someone, but it's really shocking, I think, to know like literally what he had to do to accomplish this, like moving a young woman's body, just pouring cement on with the hopes that no one ever finds her. I think Prestopino does everything in his power to just kind of erase her.
If not for how aggressive we were at continuing to follow up and the investigation, going through the various search warrants, the social media, and the cell phone mapping, this probably would never have been solved.
For Cassandra Garrett, we felt like we had to give her some credit or some benefit for assisting with locating the body. And so she got a 20-year sentence with parole eligibility after 8 years.
Christopher Prestopino eventually pleads to second-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping and receives a sentence of 10 to 25 years combined.
It's really shocking, I think, to know like literally what he had to do to accomplish this with the hopes that no one ever finds her. That's pretty dark to be able to do that. I've prosecuted homicides for 20 years. And the thing that I always think about in this case is how she's preyed upon when she's in this really vulnerable state. So that's always the part for me that it makes it really sad.
Her brother called me to come get her dog, Bonita. As soon as I picked her up, she stayed by my side. She was my emotional support animal. So she traveled with me. I took care of her for quite a while. And she went to Esmeralda's funeral with me and everything. I put her down October of 2021. So, and to this day, her ashes are next to her mom's ashes in her room. It doesn't make sense to me. Literally, you could have just let her go and said she's not mentally well. Why did you have to kill her?
This case is Dracula meets the Sons of Anarchy.
I've never seen anybody go to this length to dispose of a body.
At that point, we had got a ladder, and I went down.
We were thinking, is Keith down there?
This was a search for the truth wherever it lay.
He'd never admitted any responsibility.
Here was a man who would kill for nothing.
He had no emotion, a cold, callous, distasteful individual.
I'm sorry if you've got that opinion, but you're totally wrong.
There was a real potential that he would kill again. My name is Steve Wilkins. I'm a former Detective Chief Superintendent in Dyfed-Powys Police. During the 80s, within this very small area of North Pembrokeshire, there was really a blip on the landscape in relation to serious criminality. Within a distance of no more than 5 miles, we had 2 double murders. And then in 1996, 5 children were indecently assaulted by a man with a balaclava and a double-barrel sawn-off shotgun. A number of lines of inquiry were undertaken, but those offences remained undetected. It was like the elephant in the room, which people didn't really want to talk about, and that was very unacceptable. I believe the evidence is always there. It's just having the people with the will to find it. For me, it's about the search for the truth. A couple of people who were travelling home one evening noticed that there was plumes of smoke crossing the road. The Scoverson Park farm was well ablaze.
News on the hour. Police have revealed more shocking news on the deaths of millionaire landowners Helen and Richard Thomas. Initial suspicion that the siblings had died in a murder-suicide pact have been discounted. Since recovering their bodies from the fire, police have discovered shotgun injuries that could not have been self-inflicted. More on that as the story unfolds.
Helen Thomas was alone in the house during the evening time. Her brother Richard was out at Knowlton Farm. What we believed was likely to happen was that Richard came back, the house was ablaze. His sister had already been attacked and shot while she was in the house. In an outhouse not far away from the main building, there was probably a struggle between him and the offender with the gun, and then the gun has gone off. Richard's body is then dragged back into the house, onto a half landing, and his body is left there. Helen's body is recovered on the ground floor, but she's actually lying on top of bed springs, and what we think happened is that she's attacked in an upper floor, probably a bedroom, and during the fire, the floors are burnt out and the body on top of the bed springs has dropped through to the ground floor.
The damage was quite significant, which made it difficult to determine whether anything of value had been taken from the house.
There was a substantial search of the house by the officers in the investigation, and at no stage did they find a firearm or indeed any spent cartridges. So it was quite clear that the offender had taken the firearm and spent cartridges away from the scene.
Today's headlines. The bodies of missing holidaymakers, husband and wife Peter and Gwenda Dixon, have been found gunned down on a coastal path. Their brutal deaths have shocked the local community.
Peter and Gwenda Dixon, a couple from Oxfordshire, they used to visit Pembrokeshire regularly, they loved the area, they were well known in the area. On the 29th of June 1989, they went for a walk along the coastal path. At this stage, they were attacked.
Peter was tied up with rope. There was evidence that Gwenda had been sexually assaulted by the offender.
Witnesses who were actually down here in the bay on the beach, they heard 5 shots.
Both had received gunshot wounds. The offender had tried to cover his tracks by covering the bodies in branches.
Horrifying event, and quite clear that one of them had to watch their loved one murdered in front of them before their hopeless expectation that they were going to meet the same fate.
Their property was strewn around the area. Again, what was clear was that there were items of value missing from the couple, their wallet and cash card.
Following morning, Peter Dixon's cash card was used. The offender used this particular cash point at 14 minutes past 7 in the morning. A witness who was passing that moment in time, their attention was drawn to somebody that was using the cash point of what was described as the wild man, unkempt hair, unshaven, and he was wearing a pair of knee-length khaki shorts. We're now at the location of the Milford Haven attack. If we look across the field, you'll see that the field slopes away to the far end to my right. It was in this field that 5 children were playing. They were then confronted by a masked man, balaclava, brandishing a sawn-off shotgun. He made them lie on the ground. He hit the boys around the head with his sawn-off shotgun. He then selected one of the girls and took her away from the group, where he raped her. Brought her back to the group, took another female away, and indecently assaulted her. For me, it's an offence which was equally as shocking as the 2 double murders, because those children, without doubt, had their childhood taken away from them on that evening in 1996.
Chief Superintendent Steve Welkin has successfully been granted permission by superiors to reopen Pembrokeshire's most brutal and harrowing unsolved cold case crimes.
I was aware that nationally there had been some success in cold case reviews. And after discussions then with the then head of CID, Steve Mears, and chief officers, we all agreed that that must be a priority, and I set about very quickly was to put together a plan for us to actually start the review of 3 major undetected crimes. We had 2 double murders, a rape, an indecent assault. Our investigation was then codenamed Operation Ottawa. There's no greater responsibility placed on a human being than to investigate the circumstances of the death of another human being. And we need to carry out that without fear, without favour, but also without prejudice as well. Because if we don't, then we've got no right in representing the victims. So I wanted to be very, very clear that this was a search for the truth wherever it lay. Once I'd actually started to look at the offences, started to draw links between them, the method of offending bore strong similarities. Multiple victims, double-barrel shotgun, robbery, a sexual element.
All this information put together resulted in determining that it was a single person who was committing these offences.
Was one individual, and we need to actually identify a suspect. I really started to review our response in relation to serious crime. And what was clear is that we didn't have a dedicated team, a major crime team, with the training and with the capability of reviewing the undetected crimes. I'd already identified that I need people that I could trust, a team that would pay attention to detail, officers that I'd put against any in the UK. Glyn Johnson was also somebody I knew that would concentrate on details, who was very good in relation to IT. And I know that he'd be an essential part of the team because of his can-do attitude.
Coming into the force, bringing my family down into this area, it was certainly concerning for me that there were 2 undetected, very nasty murders that had taken place, all not too far away from where I was actually living. So I was approached by Steve Wilkins, who made me aware that the force was doing a cold case review. I saw that as a golden opportunity to bring a dangerous person to justice, and of course, I took it.
Our first challenge was to identify a location away from any police building, somewhere where we could carry on with the actual investigation and not be disturbed. I also was very keen on keeping the investigation covert at that moment in time. We found some offices which are up at Fishguard. They were occupied by the Coast Guard and the Port Authority. I made this journey on hundreds of occasions on my way to visit the team, and it's exactly that same feeling. I can feel my pulse starting to race, I can feel that adrenaline, and it just makes me feel like I did, 15, 20 years ago. It's quite spooky. Just hasn't changed at all, has it?
It doesn't.
Yeah?
It hasn't changed a bit. It's been 15 years since I last came down.
I think a concern for me was that isolation.
It was quite significant, as it was 12 miles away from the station that I was working in. I hadn't had any contact with my colleagues in Haverfordwest at that time. It was lonely times, just included spending long times away from home, but we knew we got a job to do.
It's quite mixed emotions when I actually look at the place there now, because this is where it started. I can remember the first days when we went into a very dark and very unwelcoming building, and how quickly we turned it into a functioning incident room. Photographs around the walls, photographs of the bodies, and very, very violent scenes. The MO of the unresolved murders and sexual assaults indicated it was one perpetrator, and more than likely local to the area. So we began to review historic cases, looking for a pattern that might connect to other crimes. During the 90s, there was the spate of dwelling house burglaries. Lots of the houses around here were attacked, lots of burglaries took place, cash and jewellery stolen, and they seemed to have a very similar method of offending to the undetected crimes that we had.
The offender using a shotgun, and the offender would also have a balaclava.
The offender would approach by fields, would cut fences, single females alone in houses. He tied them up and then subjected them to quite disproportionate violence until he actually made a significant mistake. During a particular nasty armed robbery, the victim managed to activate a panic alarm in the house, which caused him to flee across the fields. And whilst doing so, started to get rid of items of his offending. A suspect been identified, and when you looked at the burglaries mapped out and plotted and presented evidentially, it was like looking at a bicycle wheel, and right in the epicentre of that bicycle wheel was his house. The hedgerows which came away from the house, they found jewellery, gloves, a balaclava, and in particular a sawn-off shotgun.
Sufficient evidence to put him into prison.
He was a man called John William Cooper.
A Swansea Crown Court jury has sentenced Pembrokeshire resident John William Cooper to 16 years imprisonment for a series of violent armed robberies over more than a decade.
He was a dangerous, controlling individual.
His son painted a picture of this man who was both verbally abusive, physically abusive. He would beat him. He threatened him with a firearm. We know that he had significant gambling habits.
He was a keen darts player, and there was a story out there that one night after a darts match, and he'd lost a darts match, that he'd fallen out with the guy that he was playing darts with, and they went outside and he beat him up.
Locally, people would give him a wide berth.
Again, there was only circumstantial evidence with regards to the potential involvement in the murders.
John William Cooper had been identified as a person of significant interest for the undetected murders and the sexual assault.
On the conviction of him for the burglaries and robberies, we knew that at some stage he would be coming out of prison, and that put extra responsibility on us. And the forming of Ottawa in 2006, we knew that he was coming out of prison about 2008, so yeah, huge challenge.
It was time for us to carry out a fundamental thematic forensic review, and that would involve looking at all of the material, all of the evidence, the physical evidence in relation to those offences. For Ottawa was the sheer size of it. We had thousands of exhibits to retrieve. Then we start to prioritise those exhibits which I know had either been touched by the offender, brought to the scene by the offender, or had come into contact with the victims. Evidence that would connect an offender to the offences itself. One sock which was recovered from the body of Richard Thomas was almost intact. There was also rope which was found, which was tied round Helen Thomas. clearly what we'd be looking for was DNA, linking John William Cooper to the undetected crimes that we had at that moment in time.
We were pretty much restricted to DNA profiling, at least in the first instance. Very, very focused and painstaking.
One significant piece of evidence was a pair of khaki shorts which were recovered from John Cooper's house. And though they bore a resemblance to those of the wild man used in the cash point in Haverfordwest, they were significantly shorter. What we did know is that John Cooper's wife was a seamstress. Those shorts were initially examined for DNA.
Our relationship with Stephen and the team was very good to start with, but it took a bit of a knock when it was becoming obvious that we were not getting the sort of DNA results that I think we'd all hoped for.
We were getting very little sort of feedback in relation to any sort of connectivity or any results. The forensic evidence was so degraded that there was no real readable results coming from it.
To say that we were slightly disheartened, I would say, was probably an understatement at that time.
Watching the frustration of the team when we didn't seem to have the luck going in our direction, particularly the lack of sort of forensic hits, the golden nuggets as I used to call it. That was a particular low time. The undetected crimes at that stage, nobody had actually sat across the table and put the offences towards John William Cooper, so I decided at that stage that we would actually get him out of prison and interview him around elements of his offending history, the fact that he used firearms, the fact that he used rope, and perhaps persuade him to confess to what he had done. He may have a pang of guilt and decide that he wants to tell us everything.
I interviewed John Cooper about 8 times during the initial stage when we're doing a lot of background questioning. There's no doubt in my mind that these interviews are certainly the most challenging and important that I've ever experienced in my 30-year policing career. Leading up to the first interview, I'd never met him before. He walked past me, stopped, and in a nasty type of menacing type of way, he turned to me and said, "Have I met you before?" I said, "No, I don't think so. I'm glad about that." The only thing I can equate is that when you see a middleweight boxer and they had that steely stare with no emotion or anything, when he was walking in there, he was going into that interview room on a mission and he had no emotion, a cold, callous, distasteful individual. It's very difficult sitting next to somebody, particularly with these horrendous offences and the type of the things that the victims have gone through.
We started talking about the tools of his offending.
We'll talk about ropes, because ropes were used in a number of the offences, particularly the double murder offences. John Cooper said that, yes, he had ropes, and he had it on his boat, and he used to go down Little Haven fishing. But sometimes, he'd lost a lot of ropes, and people would come and steal ropes. So I think he was making us believe, well, if any of the ropes are linked to me, they could have been ones which have been washed off, or I've lost from my boat, or they've been stolen. The same with the balaclava. Then he said, yes, I had a balaclava on my boat, and it was stolen from me. So if there's any forensic link, somebody's stolen my balaclava, I haven't been involved in the offence.
Cooper was a very clever person with regards to second-guessing where the questions were coming from. He would wait to see where the evidence was coming from, and then he would come up with an answer to try and curve that.
I believe that you were responsible for the murder of Gwenda and Peter Dixon.
All I can say is I'm sorry if you've got that opinion, but you're totally wrong.
That interview didn't bring any confessions from Cooper.
He'd never admitted any responsibility.
We knew that he was coming to the end of his sentence. That was probably, for me, the most concerning part of the investigation, was once that Cooper had been released on parole. I actually also used that as a lever in relation to to justify was we should carry on with Operation Ottawa, because the reputation of the force, the safety of the community was at risk. The real possibility of him coming out and offending before we had the chance to charge him was significant. And that came with its own problems, because it's very difficult then to carry out any sort of surveillance on him as an offender, because his offending with a firearm going across fields. So to try and do any sort of surveillance, you would also be putting officers at risk, not only the local community. I wanted to ensure that we kept him in as long as we could. I made personal appeals to the governor of the prison. That didn't go particularly well, because all that happened was that the prison recategorised him as a Category A offender, which made it more difficult for me to have access to him. So these were different pressures.
John William Cooper has today been released after serving 10 years of his 16-year sentence.
We were aware that Cooper is a very dangerous man.
There was a real potential that he would kill again.
It became a ticking bomb. Our QC, our barrister, Gerard Elias, came on board during that period as well.
I was the senior prosecutor, QC, and of course helped the police with the investigation from a very early stage. And I said, look, if this is the best we've got, circumstantial evidence, it's a pretty strong circumstantial evidence case, by which I mean there's a better, not much, but there's a better than 50% chance we shall succeed in a prosecution. I spoke with the team and they showed me the locations. It became even smaller as a part of the world, if you like. And so my feeling that there was just about a circumstantial evidence case was helped by seeing the geography, seeing the places. You know, some of these places could only have been attacked by somebody who knew the area. The place where the body was found off the coastal path. Somebody had to know that. It wasn't an accident that the attacker took them there. He obviously knew that that place existed. With the Scoverston Park murder, you know, the fire was set by accelerant, paraffin, as I recall it. There was a tank of paraffin alongside the house, but who knew that? Not your random robber, but it was somebody who had a fairly intimate knowledge of the property, because he put the accelerant on, and how did he know that? Because, of course, he'd been there before, because he'd worked for them. And so these things, you know, were building together, I make no bones about it, that we had the right man. But my view was that until you've got the thumbprint, the golden nugget, the bit that says that is him, sometimes the jury will say you haven't got the absolute certainty.
But really, we were absolutely convinced that at some stage that we would find the truth, we'd find that golden nugget, linking John William Cooper to the offences. I was aware that nationally there had been some success in looking back at historic offences, and in particular the advances in forensic science had now given us a real fighting chance to re-examine some of those offences and to bring modern day science to bear on them.
We tried to be as imaginative as possible about the way in which we came at some of these items. We were in this kind of DNA straitjacket, so we had suggested, why don't we look a little bit wider? One of the things that we found had been really useful, and that is textile fibres, because the victims were wearing clothing. The offender, I'm sure, was wearing clothing. There had been contact between them, and this gives us another kind of evidence to look for.
When we actually started to look for fibres, this is a different process. The forensic evidence would either take us towards John William Cooper, or it would take us to identify another offender.
One main new technique with a higher power microscope, that just gives you better discrimination about the colour of fibres and being able to compare them. It was a game changer in fibre examinations. It can provide incredibly powerful evidence of contact in their own right. Now suddenly, we started finding stuff. It was amazing. Even I was amazed.
You had fibres going from Cooper's house to these offences. You had fibres also from items found in the offences going back to Cooper's house.
His shed was searched and sweepings were taken from the floor in his workbench. And in those sweepings were fibres which were linked to gloves which belonged to Cooper, and fibres from those were recovered on branches covering the bodies of the Dixons. They were recovered in the underwear of the rape victim from the Milford Haven attack.
The links from fibres were a huge part of that case. You know, beyond any possibility of coincidental transfer, similar fibres. The work they did was phenomenal. I mean, there isn't another word for it.
Shorts recovered from Cooper's home were re-examined.
And was while looking for textile fibres that we noticed this tiny, tiny stain.
I was driving, and during that journey, my hands-free telephone went, and it was Angela Gallup, and she said, "Steve, are you driving?" And I said, "Yes."
We found your golden nugget.
"I think you need to pull over." I managed to pull into a lay-by, and she said, "Steve."
We found this tiny flake of what looked like blood.
It was indeed my golden nugget.
We profiled that and came up with a match called Peter Dixon's DNA.
And I said, "Angela, I love you." From that moment, we had the first DNA link. After that came out the sawn-off shotgun, which Cooper had used during the robberies for which he was convicted. It had been tested for DNA, it'd been taken to pieces, it'd been swabbed, but we had noticed that there was black Hammerite paint on the barrel. There was another high-profile case with Lynette White where paint was removed from skirting boards, which had been successful, so we asked them to do that.
So we tested them and got a DNA profiling result that also matched the DNA of Peter Dixon.
Which meant at that stage we then identified the murder weapon. I put together then the arrest team to go and arrest him whilst he was on his morning walk. It was quite a funny moment because he basically threw the officers around like rag dolls.
He later on went to say that he didn't know we were police officers and he thought that he was getting beaten up in the street. He was still a very, very strong guy. We sat him in the back of the car, and that was probably one of the longest journeys and most quietest journeys I've ever been on, to be honest.
Okay, we're now approaching on this journey another significant location, and that's Haverfordwest Police Station. This is the location where we conducted the second interview with Cooper, having secured the very damning forensic evidence against him.
During the second series of interviews, when he was arrested, he became aware that the forensic evidence was stacking up on him. He had nowhere to go. He was back against the wall. He couldn't give any explanation as to how Peter Dixon's blood was on those shorts and shotgun. And I think then he realised he was really in trouble and that the true Cooper was coming out.
You're making things try to fit to John Cooper, and it's bloody annoying.
We got this forensic evidence, it all comes back.
You know, as a young lady, I once said, I've tried to put you and give you information that you can check.
He blurted out, "Oh, you're all thinking it's all about John Cooper. You in here and them in there," pointed at the camera.
You and your colleagues and them in there choose not to believe it.
And you could see he wanted to erupt at that point. He knew the cards were against him and he was going to face a trial in Crown Court.
John William Cooper, convicted for a spate of violent armed robberies in the 90s and released in 2008, now stands accused of 2 double murders and the attack and indecent assault of 5 teenagers. He arrived at Swansea Crown Court to face trial today. The allegations are the result of a historic cold case review, investigating crimes spanning as far back as 1985.
Judge me after the trial, not before. Judge me after the trial.
It's quite a strange position to be in. You've just controlled an investigation for 6 years. The judges put that in the hands of 12 people from the community to listen to the evidence. So from total control, you have no control.
The geography was hugely important. We had all that wonderful evidence of how the paths, sometimes through thickets, sometimes through barbed wire fences which had been snipped, how all those paths in the end found their way back to one place, which happened to be the place where Mr. Cooper was living at the time. When the defense were asking questions, they spent the whole of the day really not dealing with much of the evidence, except for him to say, no, I didn't kill the Dixons, I wasn't involved in Scoverton, and I wasn't the person in the field. I mean, that was really his defense, okay, without going into too much more detail. And the jury were even playing a video of his daughter's wedding, where he was giving her away, where he was making speeches. The impression being given, despite all the prosecution say, this is actually a decent family man. Would he have done any of these nonsensical things that they're talking about? And so at 4 o'clock, when the defense sat down, I didn't want the jury left with this idea that he was really just a family man who we might all have misunderstood, and, you know, the evidence was being doctored against him and so on. So I thought, I'll just take one point. And the one point, of course, was what he'd said about a balaclava.
He said, is it not true that in your previous trial for robbery, you said the discarded balaclava did not belong to you? But in this trial, because your head hair has been found in it, you're now saying that that balaclava does belong to you, but it must have been stolen off your boat.
So I simply spent 10 minutes trying to get him to say, you did lie to that previous jury, didn't you? But in the end, of course, he has to say, yes, I lied to the previous jury about a very important exhibit. Thank you very much, my lord. That'll be a convenient moment. And I think, you know, so the jury were not going home thinking, oh, yeah, this is a man who actually, you know, makes it up on the hoof. And of course, he doesn't want to tell the truth even now.
It was just the cool, calculated way that Mr. Elias operated.
For me, it was a stroke of pure genius. The next morning, Mr. Elias looked at the jury and said,
I want to tell you a story, members of the jury, and the story really is in 3 parts. The first part is this. You know, in 1985, this happened. In 1989, that happened. And in 1996, this happened. Horrific offences. This was the evil man who had answers for almost everything. The man who would go out with a gun in the evenings, and if there was a chance of a burglary, he'd take it. And if he met somebody, he'd execute. Here was a man who would kill for nothing.
The artist's impression of the person believed to be using the Dixon's cash card showed the side profile of the potential offender with a massive curly hair, unshaven. During the robberies inquiry, Cooper didn't look nothing like the artist's impression. However, it became apparent to us during the Ottawa investigation that Cooper had been on television on Bullseye in 1989. We were fortunate enough then to get a side profile shot of Cooper from the television company.
I mean, I remember the first time I saw it, you know, you said, good Lord, that's an amazing artist impression.
It was almost like they'd done an artist's impression of him on Bullseye.
It was as good as you could get, really, short of a photograph. And it was phenomenal, but of course the impact. It was like some of the big moments in the trial where you realised the jury knew that this wasn't some coincidence that put the defendant there. He was there because that was him.
We'd look at the exhibits that we got, Scoverston, Dixon's, Milford Haven, and the robberies.
The locations.
And rope.
The victim's blood.
Cut fences. DNA link.
Fibres from gloves.
Leading to Cooper's house.
Those fibres matched. The blood found underneath the paint on the shotgun, and indeed the blood on the shorts, would go to the Coastal Path murder.
He kept the shorts, which were later identified as belonging to Gwenda Dixon, for years and years after he had murdered them. Why did he do that? And it was quite clear that he wore those shorts. Was it because when he put them on, it put him mentally back in that time when he had control of those people?
The son's evidence late on in the trial that his father would go out at dusk with the dog and with the gun. You know, I mean, how important was that in relation to putting him in the field with the youngsters? The girls themselves gave evidence very bravely and very well indeed, very, very bravely. It was a big moment. It was huge.
After more than 7 weeks, both legal teams involved in the trial of John William Cooper have finished giving evidence, and jurors will be expected to come to a verdict.
If the investigation failed and he was given his freedom, I would take responsibility. I had already written out my resignation.
I had this, it's a rather panicky feeling when you're making a closing speech and you think the jury are perhaps not listening to you anymore.
We spent every day waiting and hoping that the verdict would shortly be released.
This was a very tense time because nobody ever knows what the verdict a jury is going to give.
People start to look at, how long has the jury been out? Why are they taking so long to come to a decision?
I don't care how long you've been doing it. It's in the hands of the jury at the end of the day, and you never know.
The victims of the Milford Haven attack were actually in a one-way glass room next to the court. They could see into the court. When the first verdict came back and he said the word guilty to that one, I turned to Lynn Johnson and I said, it's a full house.
Guilty of the murders of Helen and Richard Thomas, guilty of Peter and Gwenda Dixon's murders, guilty of the rapes of the 2 girls in Milford Haven.
Cooper never said a word until the verdict for rape. He then exploded in the court and started to shout at the court.
Here we had a man convicted of 4 murders, and now rape. He knew that was going to put him into prison where nobody would have the remotest bit of sympathy for him. Now he's going to be a marked man.
It was fabulous to know the person responsible for these terrible, heinous crimes was now going to spend the rest of their life behind bars.
We looked at each other and said, that's it then. It's done. It's finished.
There was a cloud on the area, and I think with the Crown Court verdict, it gave closure.
And I always remember one message which I received from somebody who said that they hadn't walked the coastal path for 20 years and that they were going to walk it that weekend. Suddenly this dark cloud had been lifted over the top of that part of Wales and Pembrokeshire.
It probably was the biggest case that I was involved in. In terms of criminal trials, this was a remarkable case. I mean, it was remarkable because of its age, because of the investigation that had to be carried out against that background when we're going back 20 and 30 years. And I would agree entirely that it is, in all probability, the greatest cold case review and result that there has been.
I am very proud that we were able to represent the victims and their families and for them to see justice done.
Judge Griffith-Williams gave him life means life, which to my mind was an inevitability, because here you were talking about a dangerous psychopath. Given the opportunity to kill for next to nothing, he'd do it again, I have little doubt.
For me, it was around achieving justice, about finding the truth, about making sure that those victims of John Cooper had their day in court and had justice and had an opportunity to try as best they could to move on.
The young people, they were obviously frightened out of their lives by what happened to them, and their evidence undoubtedly contributed to the conviction. There was family of the Thomases, and I met them during the trial. I met the son and daughter of the Dixons. They go down every year to lay flowers at the point where their parents were killed, and they've maintained the memory of their parents. They're good people, and of course they went through hell because of the events and the impact it had on their own families. So all of them, in a way, have played a really important part in ensuring that John Cooper will not see the light of day again.
Searching the truth is very important. It's very important not to get carried away, but just to look at what evidence you've got. It was a very long journey over several years.
Those 5 years were a long 5 years.
And for the families of the victims, it was a tremendously long journey, which they're still on.
Some of these officers worked on that investigation for 5 years. They were totally dedicated to it. Surrounded by misery, by mayhem, by murder, then to go home and to be a father, to be a brother, to be a husband for families is sometimes very, very difficult.
So you certainly had to deal with it yourself. I think all of us suffered.
I spent a significant amount of time away from home. Very soon after the court case, I separated from my then wife, which obviously caused significant issues at home with my children. John Cooper had an impact on all of us. The way he went about his offending, I think he enjoyed what he did. I think he got some sort of sexual satisfaction about what he did and controlling people. But I just think the man was just born evil. On a quiet moment, I will sit and I'll look at the things we did. I'll reflect on other parts of my policing career. And fortunately or unfortunately, I've had that opportunity to see people at their very best, but also see people at their very, very worst. And I don't think you'd be human if that didn't have some sort of lasting impact on you as an individual. And I know I'd probably speak on behalf of the rest of the team, is that we have all had issues in different ways, and that's a consequence of being a detective, consequence of being a cop.
Cracking cold cases. Stream the new series of hit crime drama Unforgotten on ITVX. And that's also where you can find classic noughties comedy starring Zach Braff. That's Scrubs. But next, the latest stories with the ITV News at 10.
The police are meant to protect us from the worst of society. We trust them to uphold the law and keep us safe. But what happens when the protector becomes the predator?
He's performing as the protector of the public. On the other hand, he's actually a really dark monster.
Is that how you obtain this material?
And the people who are meant to keep us safe become dangerous.
I'm arrested on suspicion of attempted murder.
Even though you're a police officer, people will feel that they're above the law.
But how would you catch a criminal who thinks like a cop?
He's got a head start on the investigation team.
He's panicking at this point, and he's now running.
I've enlisted the help of 3 experts. 2 senior officers that have put hundreds of offenders behind bars.
Most people, they know when their back's against the wall and they're going to get convicted for something.
The horror He's one of us.
And a leading psychologist who can analyse the criminal mind.
Underlying that anger is the need to dominate, is the need to control.
In this series, I'll discover cops who put themselves on the wrong side of the law,
He's like a Jekyll and Hyde character.
abuse their power, and commit horrific crimes.
You should never have had that badge, ever.
When a senior police officer abuses their power to violate and humiliate their victims in the worst way imaginable, you've got to ask yourself, how was they ever fit to wear the uniform? Over more than a decade, Western Australia cop Adrian Trevor Moore committed some of the most sadistic crimes in the force's history.
Adrian Moore drugged and raped more than a dozen women he met online. In a case so vulgar, the jury needed counselling.
The vile acts he carried out shook the community and eroded their trust in the police to protect them. The story first came to light 6 years earlier.
It's January 2018 when a serving police officer contacts the Internal Affairs and complains of inappropriate behavior by Moore.
Police seize Moore's computer, and detectives uncover evidence suggesting he might have been using the police database to target women.
The police database is there for you as a police officer conducting inquiries, and therefore there's an awful lot of sensitive information is held within that. And that brought about an investigation.
If true, Moore's actions were a total abuse of trust, but Internal Affairs needed proof. To help me understand how to go about catching a cop, I'm turning to former Detective Chief Inspector Howard Groves. How did they go about investigating this?
They decided to set up a sting in the hope that Adrian Moore would actually go onto the police system and actually look into it.
This would be the beginning of a case that would shock and sicken the people of Australia.
I reported on Adrian Trevor Moore's case for Channel 7 News here in Perth. So yes, Internal Affairs officers, they created a fake dating profile, this name Sally Fields.
Wait, so they set up a fake profile to snare him, to catch him in the act?
That was to try and essentially trick him, into thinking that this was a real woman that he'd be interested in, and he fell right into their plan.
Moore continued to comb through the police database, identifying women classified as vulnerable, either witnesses or victims of previous crimes. Straight away, that sounds like an abuse of his position.
It is an extreme abuse of power, looking up extremely sensitive information, like home addresses, date of births, phone numbers. There's a plethora of information, and he completely stole that trust from his victims.
As part of their investigation, police raided Moore's home and confiscated his electronic devices, including computer hard drives. What happens next?
Police actually uncovered hundreds and thousands of recordings. And what they found on these recordings was absolutely horrific. They found sexually explicit conduct on these hard drives, thousands of videos, thousands of images. Adrian Moore had been misusing police databases to vet something like 90 women over more than a decade, and he'd been doing this since 2006.
The sting was a success. Moore was arrested. Internal Affairs exposed his misuse of the database to vet potential partners and revealed a huge collection of hardcore pornography and recordings of his sexual partners. How many images are we talking?
They found thousands of images of women. These images depicted sexual acts being committed against these women. Some of these images were quite extreme, but also they found images of bestiality. And that was a much more alarming and of concern to the officers in terms of the investigation.
In court, Moore was found guilty of misusing the police database and for being in possession of bestiality porn. In February 2019, he was sentenced.
His sentence was 6 months and a day imprisonment. He received a fine of $2,000 for the bestiality porn that was found on his computer.
The explicit images were dismissed as consensual. What the police hadn't yet uncovered was the full extent of Moore's horrific acts. For now, he sat quietly serving his time without raising suspicion.
I could imagine he's thinking, hey, I've got away with it. They haven't uncovered the full extent of what I've done. But sitting at home watching this all play out was Nicole Edwards.
Moore's police colleague, Nicole Edwards, had a story that will blow the lid off this case.
I remember being struck across the face while sitting on the couch. My head hit the back wall, and I remember thinking, I'm in trouble here.
In February 2019, Western Australian police officer Adrian Trevor Moore was sentenced to 6 months in prison for misusing police systems to look up vulnerable women. We know Moore abused his access to the police database, and he had a taste for extreme pornography. That in itself is a massive breach of trust. But it makes me think, if he's capable of that, what else has he been up to? During the investigation, police seized Moore's computer hard drives, uncovering thousands of explicit videos he claimed were consensual. But one person knew better. Fellow officer Nicole Edwards. Outraged that the police went after Moore just for the computer misuse charges, Nicole stepped forward and reported to her police superiors that in 2017, she had been raped by Moore.
Nicole Edwards, she was a survivor, and she is obviously at home thinking to herself, hang on, someone just got a slap on the wrist for misuse of police computer, when in fact this man is a monster.
To help me understand what Nicole would have gone through, I'm meeting psychologist Serena Simmons. So how did Nicole actually meet Adrian Moore?
So Nicole met Moore in 2017 and she met him on a dating site. So the fact that she found him on a dating site gave it a sense of safety because it was something that was used by many, many people. He was another police officer. So as someone who was a police officer herself, knowing that someone was also a police officer, I think, gave her a sense that there was someone with shared values, that this is someone that is like me, they understand the job, they had something already in common.
Nicole went on a first date with Moore. The pair met in a public place and they hit it off.
And from there, she interacted with him for a short while, felt so comfortable that she invited him to dinner at her home. Said that he was actually really quite charming, very, very nice, and she felt really, really comfortable with him, which shows how good he is at putting that act on straight away. So he's able to lure someone in, make it all seem very, very normal, very run-of-the-mill. And then this is where he begins to change.
In a 2023 interview, Nicole opened up about what happened on that second date when Moore came to her home for dinner.
I remember him handing me a glass of red wine and he said, drink it and hurry up, I'm going to pour you another one. And I remember having a mouthful of it, and then after that, I just start to feel strange.
What Nicole didn't realise was Moore had spiked her wine with an unknown drug.
There was a lot of blanks, so I remember being struck across the face while sitting on the couch. My head hit the back wall, And I remember thinking, I'm in trouble here.
Can I just pause that a second? He's drugged her. Why is he then punching her and beating her up? And is this what he wants? He just wants to... I don't understand what he's getting from that.
Remember, so he's drugged her, he has control. He wants to cause her pain and suffering, so he hits her and beats her and tortures her. He then proceeds to rape her. He does incredibly degrading things to her to completely have complete control over her. And all the while, he's getting sexual gratification out of it.
I just find it unbelievable and difficult to even comprehend the mindset of somebody who not only does that, but enjoys it, gets sexual gratification from that.
And then I remember he grabbed me by the hair, pulled me across the floor, and put his penis inside my mouth and smashed my head down. And I remember thinking, I am going to die. I cannot breathe. As he's then urinated in my mouth and I am choking. And they're the two parts that I remember.
Oh, no. Oh, I have to stop it a sec.
He's also taken time to step out of it for a second and set up a camera so that he can actually video everything. Remember, he wants to go back over this and relive the events of that evening. So, utterly enjoying what he's doing in the moment, but knowing that he will get to relive this again later on as well. So he wants to see as much suffering as he can so he can relive that later.
This is something he's planned. He's planned to do this. He's drugged her. And then he goes and sets up a camera so he can watch it later and get off on it again.
Yeah, this is a completely organised offender. So he knows to bring a camera, he knows to bring drugs, he knows what he's going to do. And he would have also thought about this for a long time. And there'll be things that he's refining and doing differently and tweaking and is looking forward to doing, because this is something that he'll be thinking about all of the time. And in many ways, what's particularly twisted is you could consider that this for him is his craft. This is something that he wants to do well. And I imagine him looking at those videos and seeing what he could do differently next time.
Really?
Yeah, he'll be, again, reliving the experience and looking at what he might do next time he has access to another victim.
See, to me, he sounds insane. And I know you're probably going to say insanity means something, but to me, that seems someone who is insane.
Yeah, insanity is something very, very different. There's no signs of insanity here. This is sadistic. It's very different. It's very, very specific, very conscious, very deliberate, and he's very deliberate in his actions. There's something specifically that he wants out of it, and he's determined to get it at any cost.
What Moore did to Nicole was degrading, dehumanising. And the thought that anyone could do that, let alone a police officer, just tells me that he's really dangerous. So why didn't the police do anything with the evidence they had? It took over 12 months for Nicole to come forward and report Moore. But when she did, the reaction from her colleagues at Western Australia Police was shocking.
When Nicole initially made a complaint to Internal Affairs, the impression was that she was told to sort of, not make waves, not to do anything that was going to bring her to the attention of her colleagues and her making allegations. So she was, in many ways, she was dissuaded from actually taking it much further. A lot of times, I don't think officers intentionally want to hush things up when allegations are made by a fellow officer. But those individuals who are making the allegations, they know that they will also be looked at as to whether or not those allegations are spurious or otherwise. So it's a difficult decision for an officer to come forward in the first place. But what they need is the support of the individuals who they're making the complaint to, for them to say, yes, we're supporting you, we're going to look into these matters. But she obviously didn't feel that she was getting the relevant support.
Nicole refused to go quietly. She demanded to be listened to. It was then she discovered that there was a smoking gun.
But what happened when Nicole Edwards came forward with a complaint?
She was informed at that stage that there were actually images of her being sexually assaulted from images that they had recovered from Moore's computers. So this was the first time she heard of this, so that would have been a significant moment for her.
So she didn't even know that she'd been filmed being assaulted?
No, at that point she wasn't aware of that.
Could you imagine? You've been attacked, assaulted, raped, and it's being filmed.
The officers had wrongly assumed that Moore's footage of Nicole was consensual. In fact, it was a violent and sadistic rape. That raised the terrifying question of how many of the other women discovered on Moore's computer were being raped on camera, and how it was possible that experienced officers had been unable to spot this or to ask further questions.
Those officers who were investigating those images, at some point they had looked at them. Why weren't they considering trying to identify who those individuals were? Certainly for Nicole Edwards, when he asked her to give her basically her warrant number on more than one occasion. Bearing that in mind, if the officers had actually retrieved that particular image, that would have been an easy opportunity for them to have said, right, we know this person's warrant number, we can do a check to find out who they are, and then she would be approached for them to make the necessary inquiries.
Why do you think they didn't do that?
You can only ask those individuals for them to explain it. I can't see how that type of image, that type of footage, and nothing is done to actually identify who the victim is.
Despite a serving police officer making such serious allegations and there being video evidence of the attack, Nicole was warned off, and Moore was able to quietly leave the police, having served his 6-month sentence for misuse of the police database. It's unbelievable.
It beggars belief, really, that on face value, I don't think she was taken as seriously as she could have been taken at the time. So we know from the case that what came to light was there was video evidence of her abuse and her rape. And yet, even alongside her story, that didn't seem to be enough to do anything to now apprehend and convict this man for what he'd done. There seemed to be the focus shifting back to this minor discretion, when actually the frustration she must have felt that the focus wasn't on this really, really serious offence that he'd committed, that must have been incredibly challenging for her.
In August 2019, as Moore was released back into the community, Australia's Corruption and Crime Commission finally agreed to take up Nicole's case.
So after Moore is released from prison, having served his sentence, he becomes a boiler fitter, and very quickly he finds another victim. He basically went through the same process of meeting someone on a dating site, obviously befriending them to the point where that person felt comfortable around him, and he did what he has always done before. He then videoed his sexual encounters without her consent.
So after he comes out of prison, he just goes and rapes somebody else?
Within a short period of time, once he's released, he decided he was going to pick up from where he left off, and he actually rapes another.
This is the thing. If they'd have done their job right in the first place, then he'd have got a much bigger sentence, and he wouldn't have been able to be out on the street to do what he did to this other person.
It's a lack of professionalism on the part of those investigators. And that's what happened. You've had another victim.
Moore's latest victim stayed silent, for now. But how was Moore able to get away with these crimes in plain sight, without any of his police colleagues suspecting or trying to do anything about it? I'm coming to speak with Fiona Mallon, a former detective chief superintendent with over 30 years of experience. Fiona is a specialist in sexual crimes.
What do we know about Moore?
He was nominated for Police Officer of the Year, I think, in 2011. So he's known, he's liked, he's popular, and he's doing well. So, yeah, he's in a nice position.
The fact that he's been up for Officer of the Year, does that give him like a protection around him where he feels like he's untouchable?
Yeah, I think so. I suspect a lot of the senior managers, obviously because he was voted or nominated, thought, yes, he's really good at what he does. We're behind him, so he felt protected.
Listening to what he did to Nicole, at work he's having to show compassion. So he knows how to be in certain situations. But that's not him at all.
No. He's a Jekyll and Hyde completely. He can turn it on, he can turn it off. He's smooth, so he's very charming. He's very confident around women. And this is the other side to him, the predator, that will go and use his police position to have these relationships and then take them to the next level of rape and violence.
So Moore knows exactly what to say and how to behave to lure these vulnerable women into his web, and when he's got them there, he does these horrendous things to them.
But Moore has a significant weakness. He's unable to control his sexual urges. It's only a matter of time before the law finally catches up with him. Nicole Edwards' relentless quest for justice meant that by January 2020, the case was in the hands of the sexual assault team. Moore was rearrested, and detectives were about to uncover the full, twisted depths of his crimes.
I was contacted by the sexual assault squad. It became apparent that the severity of the videos were far more than I could ever have imagined.
In January 2020, former Western Australia police officer Adrian Trevor Moore faced allegations of rape and sexual assault from fellow officer Nicole Edwards. What had initially been viewed as recordings of consensual sexual encounters found on Moore's computer were now revealed to be horrific rapes of at least 13 women.
They find that Moore has been videoing all his assaults on all the women he's attacked, and he's been cataloguing them and keeping them for his own gratification.
So he's basically creating his own evidence against himself, but he doesn't think anyone's looking.
Yeah. And from that point, that investigation team go out and try and identify all the women, the victims on those videos, to try and speak to them. So can you imagine that you get a knock on the door from a police officer and they tell you they've seen you in a video with being attacked, violated by Moore, and that other people have seen it? It's just, you can't imagine the effect that's going to have on you.
But you just got to think some of these women probably was drugged up, might not even have been conscious.
But also there's that bit about the missing pieces, isn't there? So you've been drugged and you pass out, and then you wake up and you feel ill or you're hurting or bleeding, and you can't mix the middle bit. But someone's come to your door and said, we've watched a video and we know what he's done in the middle bit.
Can you imagine seeing that? That must have been horrendous.
The impact on these brave women was both mental and physical, finally realising the full horror of what they endured at Moore's hands.
I remember going in and I took my clothes off and I just stood there and looked at myself, and because the injuries that I had were just horrific, and so I'd been cut right across here, I had it down my back, right down my whole body. I was bleeding from every orifice.
The way that Moore manipulated these women, gained their trust, played the police card, is cunning. But what's going on in his mind? Why would he want to violate these women in such horrific ways?
The victims of Adrian Moore suffered great distress at his hands. He tortured them, he raped them, he humiliated them. And so That is going to cause deep trauma for those people who are the victims of that crime. And this is something that they'll be dealing with for a very, very long time.
He's recording all his acts and what he's doing to these poor women, but that's evidence against himself, isn't it?
So offenders like Moore like to record what they're doing if they can, because remember, this person's whole life is this paraphilia, it's this way of behaving, it's getting excitement out of someone's degradation, torture, pain, and they want to be able to relive that on tap. So the risk is worth taking, it's worth risking recording it. So what it enabled him to do is to relive the experience of the torture, which is really what he wanted to do. It's why he did it. So he had a trophy, and so sadly, he could relive their pain and find sexual excitement in that.
Moore sounds like a textbook predator. The way he abused his authority and position to stalk his victims, it's frightening. And he was so cocky. I mean, he made videos as trophies. He was thinking, they're never going to catch me. Investigators scoured the footage for clues as to who these women were and catalogued the torture they endured.
On the footage, we know there was animals involved, so yeah, bestiality, there was contraptions made, there was urinating on these women, there was brutality to the harshest degree. All while these women were barely conscious. Some of them were unconscious because Moore had drugged these women.
Detectives discovered that Moore had also used psychological control, threatening his victims with the release of the recordings of their humiliating ordeals. He shamed them into silence, knowing his position as a trusted cop would make their voices harder to believe.
Moore absolutely used his profession to his advantage. We know on one of these dates he was actually wearing his West Australian police officer uniform. So he knew that these women could trust him.
Police discovered there were around 200 women in Moore's videos. For many, the extent of what he'd done to them came like a bolt from the blue.
It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. To sit there beside someone that you know has already seen all the images, and then, as it progressed, the severity of the things that you had no idea, and seeing yourself in a way that's not like you. Your eyes are just totally in another planet, on another planet, your speech. It's just, you can hardly understand, and you're struggling to speak, and you can see that you're struggling to speak and really got no idea what's going on around you. And now, to be sitting here as being a survivor of one of Australia's worst serial rapists, I could never have imagined the impact it would have on myself, my family, and my friends.
Moore's attacks were meticulously planned and deliberate. 12 of his 13 victims were raped whilst he was a serving police officer. He used his experience as a cop not only to find his victims, but to cover his tracks, methodically destroying evidence from the scenes of his crimes.
He used to take a bag with him, like a grab bag, if you like. It was meticulously planned, so bleach, gloves, drugs, wine, everything that he could, and all the implements he used. I say implements, but torture implements, really. But then he'd clean up afterwards, meticulously. Moore took his offending to a level which is beyond comprehension. In some incidents, he has included animals, such as dogs, which makes you feel physically sick, but also you just can't imagine what those women went through. For me, this is the most vile, distressing part of the investigation.
In March 2020, a full 2 years after the police first discovered his videos, Moore was charged with 87 sexual offences. He would finally be forced to face justice, but this trial would be anything but straightforward.
Were you there for the trial? I mean, what was that experience like?
I was there every day for the trial of Adrian Trevor Moore. Hearing all of the evidence at trial made your stomach turn. There were days that you would feel sick. Sadistic, depraved, misogynistic. This was the worst case the district court judge has seen, and Moore wanted them to all see it.
In March 2020, former Western Australian cop Adrian Trevor Moore was facing 87 charges for violent, sadistic rapes, dating back to 2007. Amid the media frenzy, one rumour persisted.
Do you get the idea here that there's somebody looking out for him, someone protecting him?
There's always been the suggestion that Moore was actually protected by colleagues, whether higher up the chain or not. It's something that I don't think any of us can actually answer, but it's something that even the general public would ask themselves those questions. They said, how come he's managed to get away with these heinous crimes and everything else, and no action is taken against him?
We know that Moore was highly thought of, and often he would tell the victims that actually he was protected. So that was never really fully established or worked through. The suspicions, though, and the talk and the view that Moore was protected from within Western Australia were never proved.
Despite the mountain of video evidence and testimony from 13 victims identified from his footage, Moore pleaded not guilty.
Moore was not going down without a fight. He was a police officer. He knew the process. He chose to go to trial. He pleaded not guilty. So that not only forces your victims to have to testify in open court, it actually also forces a jury, a panel of members of the public, your mums and dads, your doctors and nurses, to sit there and watch his explicit material. He also had the opportunity for the trial to be heard by a judge alone, no jury. Moore didn't want to do that. He wanted the jury there to decide his fate. He wanted these strangers to watch this material, these women being assaulted and raped, that a judge described as sadistic, depraved, the worst material he's ever seen. And Moore wanted them to all see it.
The details of this case are horrific. I mean, you can understand why the survivors didn't come forward straight away. It must have been an agony to wait for their day in court, only then to relive it all again. It's horrendous.
Of the 13 victims that came forward at trial and bravely shared their story, each one of them had to see themselves on a screen performing these horrible acts against their will while they were drugged, barely conscious.
One woman that took the stand was the police officer that started it all and who had refused to give up until Moore was brought to justice, Nicole Edwards.
I can't even imagine how Nicole felt in that courtroom, but how did she react when she saw on the video what he did to her?
She had a very visceral reaction to seeing herself on that video, being tortured and humiliated. In fact, she vomited when she saw herself in that position, which just goes to show how having to bear witness to that again is re-traumatizing. You put yourself back in that situation and you can literally feel what's happening to you and what happened at the time. So incredibly distressing and traumatic for her to see that again. Very much illustrated by the fact that she was sick and wanted to just pause the video and stop because she needed a break.
The survivors were not the only ones traumatised by the extreme images they were forced to watch in court.
It was horrific. I never saw the actual images because for the first time in my career as a court reporter, the media and all members of the public were forced to exit the room while they play this material because the district court judge deemed it too graphic for even us to see. The only people that had to see that footage was Adrian Moore, again, the victim. The victim was forced to relive this on the witness stand, and the jury. The jury had to sit and watch all of this disgusting material. Absolutely did a lot of damage to these jury members.
Why would he force a jury trial if he had a choice? I think it's about control, making people watch what he'd done.
The jurors actually requested to seek counselling during the trial, not after the trial, which is what is usually available to jurors. They wanted immediate counselling because of the nature of the graphic material that they were seeing. They put in an application to the judge, and the judge ultimately accepted that application, but not before Adrian Moore instructed his legal team to challenge that.
Wait, his lawyers didn't want the jurors to get counselling? Why?
They said that that would cause a mistrial, which means if the jurors are thinking that this material is so graphic, so depraved, Adrian's team thought that that meant that the jurors had already made up their mind about him. And that could be seen as an unfair trial because the jurors' job is to stay objective throughout the entire thing. So Adrian Moore's legal team went, hey, this jury is not being objective. They've already made up their minds if they're wanting to seek counselling. Ultimately, the judge said, no, I'm going to allow the jurors to have counselling because he agreed that these regular mums and dads, these people would need it.
The thought of a serving police officer committing such sadistic crimes rocked not only the local community, but the entire nation. On the 17th of October 2022, Adrian Trevor Moore was found guilty on all 87 counts.
It was a huge story. It was leading our news every single night. There was front page papers. The media gallery was packed. There was, for his sentencing later on, it was a full house in the public gallery. You couldn't get a seat. This was an extremely important case, and I think the community at large was so outraged by this, and I think that's reflected in the sentence that he got.
So the judge awarded life imprisonment 30 years. It's the longest sentence for a rape offence ever in Western Australia. So the judge was really sending out a message.
And that's because of what he did to these poor women and how he did it, recording it, drugging them, and everything else that went along with it.
This might have been the end, but in typical fashion, Moore refused to go quietly.
His legal team tried to appeal that sentence. They tried to get it thrown out, saying it was too harsh a sentence, saying that the verdict should not be counted because this jury was not impartial when we were talking about them requesting counselling. They said that should be enough to overrun the entire sentence, the entire trial, and do it all again. Make these women come back, relive their trauma and do it all again.
So they wanted a do-over? After dragging all these women through this once already, I mean, he's got no sympathy, no empathy.
I believe it went all the way up to Australia's highest court. That's how hard he pushed this and was denied.
Adrian Trevor Moore will spend the next 30 years in prison, while Western Australia police have been left to try and repair the damage and restore their reputation.
In your opinion, what needs to change to stop this kind of thing happening again?
The change is required in terms of satisfying police officers that their line manager will support them when they come forward with these type of allegations. It was apparent that those women were drugged. So, you would have to say to yourself that they hadn't given consent to be drugged. Therefore, that should be something that should be investigated.
Is this a case of somebody hiding in plain sight?
I'd be surprised if his colleagues didn't know what he was doing or had some inclination about it, but for whatever reason felt that I can't come forward and say anything because I got no evidence. I've not got anything concrete. And I can understand them taking that view that, you know, I can't raise my head over the parapet and say, I think he's committing serious sexual offences against someone.
And I can't help thinking about the impact this case has had on all of Mo's survivors.
None of these women will look at the police in the same way again. I mean, and who can blame them?
No, you're right. None of these women will look at a police officer the same way again. And I think a lot of the community who watched this unfolding at home, watched the news reports, read the news reports, will be having those same doubts.
I've never heard anything so depraved and as cruel as to what Mo did to those women. And he was arrogant. He thought he'd get away with it. And the worst thing is, he did get away with it for years. It's only because of the bravery of Nicole and the other women that came forward that he's now exactly where he is, in prison. The police are meant to protect us from the worst of society. We trust them to uphold the law and keep us safe. But what happens when the protector becomes the predator?
He's performing as the protector of the public. On the other hand, he's actually a really dark monster.
Is that how you obtain this material?
And the people who are meant to keep us safe become dangerous.
I'm arrested on suspicion of attempted murder.
Even though you're a police officer, people will feel that they're above the law.
But how would you catch a criminal who thinks like a cop?
He's got a head start on the investigation team.
He's panicking at this point, and he's now running.
I've enlisted the help of 3 experts. 2 senior officers that have put hundreds of offenders behind bars.
Most people, they know when their back's against the wall and they're going to get convicted for something.
The horror, he's one of us.
And a leading psychologist who can analyse the criminal mind.
Underlying that anger is the need to dominate, is the need to control.
In this series, I'll discover cops who put themselves on the wrong side of the law.
He's like a Jekyll and Hyde character.
Abuse their power and commit horrific crimes.
We should never have had that badge, ever.
Cops deal with stressful and high-pressured incidents day in, day out. But what happens when a highly trained officer flips and not only commits a terrible crime, but goes on the run?
999, what's your emergency?
A 999 call comes in. It's anonymous, and the caller states they're concerned for the welfare of the woman in a central Manchester hotel.
Which room is she in, caller?
The first responders arrive at the scene, and immediately they're confronted with a room in disarray, of furniture being moved around, and they find Ellie Moxham unconscious, fighting for her life.
Ellie is a 24-year-old PhD student at Lancaster University. As paramedics start administering treatment, it's clear she's suffered life-threatening injuries.
They start to help her, but as they're helping her, A warrant card is also seen to be left in the room, and it's in the name of a serving officer, James Riley, from Lancashire Police.
Where was James Riley, and what exactly happened in that room? I mean, Ellie's fighting for her life, and the only person who knows what happened is Riley.
Is James Riley responsible for the attack? Or could he also be a victim? To help me unravel this case, I'm on my way to meet up with former Detective Chief Superintendent Fiona Mallon.
When you turn up at that scene and you find the warrant card there, and you find a female fighting for her life, as a detective, you're open-minded. You're thinking all of the lines of inquiry are possible. Where is that officer? Where is Riley? Are they safe? Have they gone off? What is Riley's role in this? Are they a suspect? We have to find Riley as soon as possible. That's the priority right now. Save Ellie's life and find Riley.
So James Riley's warrant card was in the room still?
Yes.
So this sounds like he's just gone.
Yes. This is moving at a very fast pace. The police need to find Riley, and they need to talk to him to find out what's happened. So a lot is going on at this point. Ellie is being conveyed to hospital, getting emergency surgery and help. The police worked out quickly that it was Riley. He'd called paramedics.
But it puts him at the scene.
Yes. At the same time, police receive a phone call from James Riley's mother, who tells them that James has rung them and said he's killed Ellie and he's going to kill himself.
So Riley's not only confessed to his mum that he's behind the attack, leaving Ellie for dead in a hotel room, now he's threatening to kill himself. What's going on in this guy's mind?
This doesn't sound like it was something planned.
No, it sounds very spontaneous. At this point, the police now know James Riley is a suspect and they have to find him as soon as possible.
For any investigator, you'd want to establish where is James Riley.
Former Detective Chief Inspector Howard Groves has decades of experience finding people that want to disappear.
Where has he gone to? Is he fleeing the scene to commit suicide? Is he fleeing the scene to go and meet his parents, whatever that may be? So initially, the investigators will be trying to work out exactly where he was. That's got to be your first port of call. The advantage for the inquiry team was that they would have had CCTV footage that they would be able to call upon to try and establish his early movements.
But this time, the person on the run is a cop, desperate to avoid the consequences of his actions. And straight away, Riley is using his police know-how to try and turn the odds in his favour.
Right, so this footage shows Riley leaving via the fire escape.
This is at the hotel?
Yes, he's at the hotel.
Why is he coming down the fire exit?
Well, he's obviously thinking there's no cameras, so he might as well take this route than going back through the reception.
So he's already thinking?
So he's thinking ahead. Quite rightly, he's thinking ahead. We can now see that he's on his phone.
Later in the investigation, police managed to trace the anonymous call to the emergency services.
So who's he calling now then?
I would suggest at that point it's the ambulance service. It's 11:28, which is roughly the time that he did call the ambulance.
Thing is, though, they said it was an anonymous call, but if he's calling from his mobile, wouldn't they be able to trace that?
They would be able to trace it, but at this moment in time, he didn't give them his details, so they would show it as an anonymous caller.
Right.
So he's on his phone.
Yeah,
he's not looking up for any cameras. He assumes that there's no cameras there. You can see he's wearing what appears to be a green jacket.
Right.
And he's on his phone at that point. He stops.
So he's going down the fire escape?
Yes, he's going down the fire escape.
Just think what he's just done there. He's just literally... He thinks he just left her dead.
He's panicking at this point. And you can see he's out the door and he's still on his phone. And he's now running.
So what do we know where Riley is now?
We know he discarded his phone, and therefore the police would not be in a position to track some of his movements. But even by the sheer chance, when the police find that phone, that's still good evidence that he's trying to keep away from them.
Riley's ditched his phone and he's on the run, trying to stay one step ahead. So what's his next move? To find out, I'm on my way to Manchester to meet Rachel Smith, a local journalist who covered this story. And we saw Riley running down the stairwell. Where does he go from there?
He jumps in his car, which is parked in this car park, and he's getting out of there. He's going as fast as he can. We can see here on the footage, he comes flying down the car park. He's really got his foot down.
Yeah, you can see he's flying, isn't he? Whoa, see that? He nearly hit that wall there.
Yeah.
So he's going right on the other side of the road.
Yeah, he's got no concern for safety.
If anyone's coming up that other way, he's hitting them there, isn't he?
Yeah.
And if you look at the time, it's 20 minutes earlier, that's when he would have attacked Ellie.
That's right, yeah.
So it's only 20 minutes gone by, so he's fresh in his mind.
He's just trying to get out of there as quick as possible, isn't he? He's trying to distance himself.
This is the exit of the car park.
Yeah. So he comes flying out of it.
Oh, that's here?
Yeah.
I can see the car there, yeah.
That's right. And when he comes down here, he doesn't get very far. He gets just a short way down there, and then he crashes his car into this barrier here.
He just crashes here?
Yeah.
What happens then? Is he just off on foot, just running?
Yeah, I mean, he can't hang around, can he?
PC James Riley was now on foot. As far as he knows, he's a murderer, and he's using all his law enforcement expertise to evade capture. So whilst Riley's on the run now, how's Ellie? What's happened to her?
Ellie's in a life-threatening situation now. It looks like she's been strangled, and her brain has struggled because of the lack of oxygen. She's put into an induced coma, and we wait to see if she's going to make it.
It's midnight on Thursday, the 10th of November 2022, and in central Manchester, a desperate manhunt is underway. PC James Riley is on the run after a brutal attack on his ex-girlfriend, starting a cat-and-mouse chase with his police colleagues across the northwest of England.
So he was thinking ahead as to how he was going to be one step ahead of his colleagues. You dispose of your phone because those things will be able to track where you are. And if you're a police officer, you will know those things even more than the average person on the street.
In this situation, when you've got a lady fighting for her life, you've got a suspect on the loose, what's it like being the head of that manhunt?
A manhunt is a fast operation, and most senior officers will have come across those sort of circumstances. You have to prioritize how you're going to deal with that investigation, and a lot will be dependent on what evidence you may have already at your disposal. So if you've got CCTV evidence, you can use that to identify where someone's heading to, or shows you a bit of the actual crime itself. Those things are useful, but you're always having to think, we need to get to this person before they dispose of evidence, before they go underground and you can't find them for weeks and months, because then that will hinder the investigation going forward. So a manhunt is a significant part of policing that has to be dealt with in an effective manner.
When Riley called his mum to confess at around 11:15 that evening, he also threatened he was going to kill himself.
The investigation team would be reviewing Riley in both ways. A, because he's left his warrant card behind. Is that a sign now that he's leaving his identity as a police officer behind, and now he's going to treat himself as a member of the public, and he's going to cause harm to himself or somebody else? Or is it a ruse to try and start his escape plan? He's now going to do everything he can to stop the investigation following him, so they're looking at it as a suspect, but also as someone to wrap around, safeguard, and stop any more risk.
In a fast-moving manhunt, piecing together CCTV can provide valuable information to the investigators.
In this footage now, you can see clearly that's Riley, but if you notice, there's one thing that's missing. He's not wearing his coat at this point. So he's discarded his coat in the vehicle or somewhere nearby.
What? Has he done that on purpose, you think?
I'd think he was set on getting away from it.
He looks a bit calmer now, though. He's not running anymore. Is that to not draw attention to himself?
Well, if he starts running and there's nobody running behind him or in front of him, he's going to be drawing attention. So you can see Riley now approaching what we now know is an ATM machine. We know at this point he draws £250 in cash.
Why does he need cash?
Well, he doesn't want anybody to be able to find where he's been by using his credit card. That's going to leave an audit trail. If you have cash, you just pay by that means.
So he's thinking of maybe going on the run with cash.
Exactly. Here he is. You can clearly see that's him again.
He's looking over his shoulder a bit though, isn't he? So he's probably thinking...
He's probably contemplating what he's going to do next.
A short while earlier, in a phone call to his mother, Riley had threatened to take his own life. But judging by his actions, there's more evidence of him trying to escape than following through on that threat. The fact that Riley says he's going to kill himself, what do you make of that?
I think it's self-indulgent. It's feeling sorry for himself now. There was no evidence to suggest he was going to go through with it. So there's never found any material or written stuff or anything that he was actually going to kill himself. It just feels like it was to mum and dad, a plea for help, I don't know, childlike maybe. But for me, it's very cowardly. I'm going to end it now. And he wants the attention back on himself, away from what he's done on himself. And why would he keep running and running?
Yeah. Riley is in panic mode, but he's savvy. He knows exactly how to throw the police off his trail, because he's one of them. It's around an hour after the attack on Ellie Moxham, and James Riley is steadily making his way out of the city centre, heading north.
It's getting away as quick as possible. The best thing to do is go on a bus. No one's going to be stopping the bus per se, unless they had the footage to say he's gone on a bus. At that point, the police officers wouldn't have that information to them.
Even though he's panicking, he's still using his police knowledge a little bit.
And it's only a matter of 3 or 4 minutes before he gets off of the bus.
Riley disappears off the grid before reappearing at a service station 30 miles away. He knows motorways are the fastest way to put distance between himself and his police colleagues. 2 o'clock in the morning.
It's almost 2.5 hours since he made the phone call. So he's some distance away.
He's covered quite a lot of distance, and we only saw him get on a bus. How's he got that far then?
He would have used a taxi. So he was just trying to change up the routes that he was taking, because he would have known that his colleagues would be looking at all of those opportunities to work out how he got from A to B.
And at this point, he thinks Ellie's dead.
Yeah, and he's probably contemplating that. She's dead. What is he going to do next?
But as police raced to apprehend Riley, they discovered that he wasn't trying to flee the country. Instead, he was trying to get back to the place he knows best, his family home in Bradford.
So we know that once Riley gets to mum and dad's house, mum and dad do everything they can to sort of keep him there. So dad secures the house, locks the doors. Mum has obviously phoned the police. However, Riley is determined to get away.
What Riley didn't realise was that his fellow officers were prepared.
The officers knew that he rang his parents. So the first question they'd have asked the parents was, where do you live? And they'd have confirmed that by voters' registry and all the other things that they can do. And when he applied for the police service, I'm sure he gave his parents' address. So they would just want to confirm that, and then they'd be looking to get hold of local officers to say, we think Riley may be heading to his parents. They would have officers in plain clothes close to where his parents live. What they didn't want is a marked police vehicle, because if he turns up and he sees that, he's going to be legging it in the opposite direction. So they'd want a discreet observation position, so that if he turns up, they'd wait for him to get into the address.
The net's closing in on Riley, but true to form, rather than come quietly, he makes one last dash for freedom. At what point do they actually arrest Riley?
When Riley gets to the address and his father locks the door so he couldn't leave, he went into the bathroom and then locked the door from the inside so that no one could get in. He more than likely was aware that police were nearby. I would have thought that there would have been blue lights flashing outside the home at that time of the morning. And he decided that he would exit the house through the bathroom window. But within minutes of him getting out through the bathroom window, he was apprehended.
So this just sounds chaotic. After a massive manhunt involving 3 police forces over 2 counties lasting several hours, PC James Riley was finally caught. In the early hours of November 11th, 2022, he was arrested on the street after climbing out of his parents' bathroom window. With Riley now in custody, investigators can start building their case against him. All this footage that they've got, they've just got so much evidence, haven't they, the police?
Yeah, the officers will be reasonably satisfied. What they have to do is build up a timeline from the moment he leaves the hotel, based on the phone calls he made, exactly when he leaves, you can see the emergency services vehicle turning up, so that's another good timeline.
And they know whereabouts he is in the country as well.
They know where he is. When he gets on the bus has got CCTV, that's showing a timeline. To get the sequence of events correct, there's always a possibility that the timing on the CCTV footage could be out by minutes, even more than that. So the officers would then make sure that they had another officer who would go out and map that route exactly that Riley took. So they were confident that the timelines fit the scenario that they're going to show to the jury.
When would the police actually try to access all this kind of information?
They would be seeking to access this information straight away.
Really?
Yes, because the hotel has the mechanisms for them to go and ask them to download that information for them. But that would be majority of this activity. They would then pick it up maybe 24 hours later because they'd look at the different opportunities to gather CCTV, and then they would try and do a compilation showing exactly what happened. So there would have been officers that would have turned up at the hotel who would have been looking at CCTV footage.
With the investigation underway, I want to learn who James Riley is and what his connection is to Ellie Moxham.
And what could you tell me about James Riley?
So James Riley was 27 years old. He was a member of Lancashire Police Force. He'd met Ellie Moxham at the University of Lancaster. They studied together, and then their relationship had continued through, and then they bought a house together in 2021. She was doing a PhD at Lancaster University, world at her feet, loads of opportunities, and they were together as a partnership. However, what is really apparent is their relationship after buying the house, possibly before, is breaking down very quickly. But Ellie's making it quite clear that she's not interested in Riley anymore. What happens, though, leading to that night, they'd already booked an event to go out together before breaking up.
Right.
It was a final farewell to which Ellie would wish she'd never shown up. In an investigation, you'd want to speak to any witnesses, and in this case, there was no better witness than Ellie.
When it comes to Ellie, what's her injuries like? Is she going to survive?
She's taken to hospital. She's put in an induced coma, so she's not in a position at that stage to provide the police with this set of circumstances that resulted in her injury. She was unable to explain a lot of what happened simply because of the injuries that she received. She was unable to give any significant evidence or information as to the circumstances surrounding the attack.
With Ellie unable to say what happened on the night of the 10th of November 2022, the question now was, why did it happen?
On the surface, Riley and Ellie were doing well. They got together at uni, they had good jobs, they bought a house together. What happened for Riley to leave Ellie for dead on a hotel room floor? Doesn't make sense.
Local journalist Rachel Smith gives more insight as to why Riley may have flipped.
How do we end up here at this hotel?
Well, we know that they'd got tickets to go to a concert at the Manchester Apollo. Although the relationship had turned sour by that point and it was looking like it was over, they'd obviously not wanted to waste the tickets, so they'd come along to enjoy the evening.
And after the concert, they come back to this hotel?
That's right, yeah. They come back to the hotel room and they both go into the room together, but unfortunately, Riley's the only one that leaves that hotel room safe.
Well, what happened then in the room?
At some point over the evening, Riley realises that Ellie's been speaking to another guy. She's been texting him and, things are getting off the ground. Now, he's obviously very, very jealous about this. And they go back to the room. From what we know, sometime around 11 o'clock, he just lost his temper and he attacked her really badly.
How does a police officer lose control so badly that he leaves the woman he's supposed to love for dead? And for that matter, how did he ever become a cop in the first place? By November 12, 2022, PC James Riley was behind bars for viciously assaulting his ex-girlfriend and leaving her for dead in a Manchester hotel room. But how does anyone, let alone a cop, just snap. To discover more about Riley's relationship with Ellie Moxham, I'm speaking with psychologist Serena Simmons.
Ellie was a young woman in her 20s. She was living a very, very full life. She had gone to university, and that is actually where she'd met Riley. And I think from what we know, although she was trying to live life to the full and she went on to do a PhD, so a very, very intelligent young woman, she actually really struggled in her relationship with Riley.
What could you tell me about Riley?
Riley was a more complicated character. So he was a police officer, so we know that that lends itself to him being able to be professional and hold down a job. He was also educated and had gone to university. But we know that in his relationship with Ellie, he was actually very, very possessive, very, very jealous character. And I think that shows more of his true personality coming through. So there was a lot of jealousy and protectiveness and possessiveness really directed towards Ellie.
Had that been from the start, or did that end up getting worse as time went on?
We get a sense when we look at their relationship from the outside. They're a young couple. They met at university. They clearly had a lot in common. They probably enjoyed each other's company to start with, and there would have been so many reasons that she wanted to really nurture this relationship with him. But obviously over time, his true personality started to come out, and I think she found that just increasingly challenging as time went on.
How did Ellie actually see Riley as a person and how he treated her?
Ellie actually describes herself as feeling like she's often walking on eggshells when she's with Riley. So there's a sense that she can't really be herself in that relationship because he is so jealous, he is so possessive.
Why do people behave like that in relationships? Why do people become possessive and controlling?
You get the sense that Ellie became his whole world, that he put a lot of focus on her, that the emphasis of his life kind of was directed towards her, that he kind of made her his everything. And I think that's why you see that element of possessiveness. I think he definitely felt like he had some kind of ownership over her.
Well, wouldn't that just drive Ellie away rather than make her want to be with him more? Should it do the opposite, wouldn't it?
There are definite signs of them drifting apart at this point. So we know that Ellie had started to see somebody else, and yet they had this pre-planned event. So prior to them breaking up, they had actually organised to go to a concert together. And they agreed to still go to that to honour the fact that they had booked it prior. And I think this is Ellie trying to show Riley that she can and still wants to be friends with him in some way. They've known each other a really, really long time. So if you think about their relationship, they've been together since university. And arguably for Ellie, there's some friendship that's the basis of that relationship, and she wants to maintain that. And I think this is her saying, look, we can still be friends. These are the kind of things that we can do together if we stay friends, and I'm really, really willing to do that.
Yeah, and it's a bit of empathy from her part as well. For Riley, does he see this opportunity of going to this concert together as maybe we can rekindle things, maybe this is my chance to get back with Ellie?
I think Ellie saw it as a purely platonic interaction, but for Riley, I do think that he was reading into this, that not only did it mean more that she agreed to still go, but that he might even be able to use this as an opportunity to lure her back and kind of encourage her to come back to him in some way.
But if Riley thought this was his opportunity to win Ellie back, he was sorely mistaken.
Ellie's making it quite clear that she's not interested in Riley anymore. And what was apparent from the evidence is that Riley pressurises Ellie to go to that gig. She does it for the sake of playing along, being nice, end of their relationship. They go back to the room where Riley thinks they're going to make it up to get back together as a partnership. However, a key point as they're going into the bedroom, Riley discovers that Ellie's got messages from another chap on her phone, and she's actually really keen on him, and she wants to start a proper relationship with this other man. And the evidence suggests this is a trigger point, then he loses complete control.
An examination of Ellie shows that she was subjected to a sustained and deliberate attack in which Riley tried to strangle the life out of her.
For Riley to put his hands around Ellie's neck, someone he supposedly loved, is a real direct, determined, angry thing to do.
And it's personal. So the whole time you're looking into the face of that person you love, whatever strange version of love he had or has, you're looking into their face. And it would have taken seconds and more seconds, possibly over minutes, for that level of pressure on that person's neck. And then we know a bag was found nearby. Now, whether the bag was part of that or suffocation.
What?
But when he's asked about it, he says he couldn't bear to look at her face. He put the bag over her head. But that's having just strangled her face to face.
Well, he strangled it until she's gone unconscious, because he said, I've just killed Ellie. So he thinks she's dead. There's a lot of time that has passed by where he could have stopped. That's my point. People say, oh, he just snapped. That's not just like punching someone.
No.
He's looked at her and strangled her until he believed he'd killed her. Would Riley have ever been involved in turning up as a police officer to domestic abuse and being on the other side of the table to what he's just done to Ellie?
Definitely. Definitely. As a first-line officer, response officer, he's gone out to every type of crime, met vulnerable victims, been part of domestic abuse arguments and seen what's happening there, domestic homicides potentially. Yes, he would have seen it all, but he didn't then transpose that onto himself, his own situation. I think he separated himself and thought he was, his home life and how he behaved was different to what he'd seen and dealt with.
So we don't look at Riley here as somebody who has planned an attack on Ellie. He actually is quite obsessed with her, and he wants to be with her. And when he realises that's not going to be the case, he's just snapped.
Exactly. There's no suggestion or evidence to say this was planned or premeditated. He's had high hopes. This meeting at the arena was going to be their get-together, their reconciliation. They have a house together. He thinks a future, and she's saying no. And these are the messages I've got with another chap. I want to go in a different direction.
Rejection is never easy to cope with. But what's shocking in this instance is how Riley, a trained police officer, responds with such brutal violence towards someone he claimed to love.
All of those built-up feelings that I think he's had for a really, really long time, the hope, the desire, encouraging her to stay with him, when he realises that that's just not going to happen, I think this is when he basically snaps at this point, and you just see that rage and the anger of not getting what he wants come to the surface.
Say Riley lost his head for a minute and just reacted in a horrible way. Then when he realises what he's done, it's what he does next. Why didn't he just call the police or an ambulance and go, what have I done, But instead he calls his family.
You would hope that something would happen in his psyche and his mindset that would say the right thing to do is to call an ambulance, to call the police. And yet he does think he's killed somebody. And what he does instead is he wastes crucial time. So Ellie suffered incredible injuries after that. Not only was it a really traumatic event, but she was physically hurt in a really, really significant way. So those 10 minutes made a really, really big difference to her health going forward.
Not only did Riley delay medical help for Ellie, but this grown man, a police officer, actually called his mum rather than the emergency services. What on earth was he thinking?
I think this is, for me, quite typical of what we see with some offenders who want to very quickly put themselves in victim state. So on face value, it looks very innocent. It looks like he's just called his parents. But what he was telling them was, I'm going to kill myself. So suddenly the focus is off of what he's done to someone else and is shifting the focus onto him. He's now victim. Poor me, I'm really distressed. Look at what I've done. This is what I'm going to do to myself. And that in itself is another way of deflecting from the real situation and really taking the emotional centre stage and kind of changing the dynamic of what we should be focused on, which at that point should have been Ellie.
This is someone who's professionally trained to remain calm, to diffuse situations. But in his personal life, he's doing the exact opposite.
Surely, being a police officer, his job is to be able to control his emotions, right?
It looks like a switch has gone off because there's no evidence prior of him being outwardly violent or aggressive. But clearly, anger was there. Anger was able to come to the surface. And as someone who's a police officer, this is something that you would hope that they would have more control over. This is completely the opposite with this case.
So not planned at all. He's just, in that moment, thought, I'm going to kill her. And he tried to kill her, right?
In my opinion, he did try to kill her.
Believing he was now a murderer, Riley desperately tried to outrun his fellow officers in his bid to get to his mum and dad's house in Bradford.
Because Riley is a police officer and he knows the area really well, so he's got his local intelligence up to date. He knows the best routes out of the city. He knows where he can get money. He knows where he can get help. He knows where CCTV is because of all the investigations he would have done. He's got a head start. He's got a head start on the investigation team. But that knowledge as a police officer and his training and everything he'd have done up to that point would help him.
Is he using any of his police knowledge in trying to get away? Is there any evidence of that?
He's drawing cash out at 2 separate ATMs, but either side of midnight, because he'd reached his maximum limit on his account.
Right.
So that's why we've got him at 2 separate locations the other side of midnight.
So he's drawn out as much as he can get. So he's thinking of going on the run then, obviously.
Yes, he's getting rid of his phone and he's changing his mode of transport all the time to keep on the move. So he's trying to lose the trail behind him. He's thinking now and he's planning. He's kicked into, how do I get out of this? How do I get out of the way of being arrested?
When he's left that room, he's left in a hurry because he's panicked, left his warrant card there. But now as time's settled, he's turned into, right, what his police brain's kicked in. And he's starting to think, I know what they're going to be looking for. And this is how they can't trace my steps.
Riley's panic at the hotel has now shifted to cold, calculated thinking. His police instincts kicked in. He knew exactly how to try and avoid capture. But soon, the full story would unravel in court. At 4 a.m. on the 11th of November 2022, PC James Riley was arrested for the attempted murder of his ex-girlfriend Ellie Moxham. A manhunt across 3 counties ended up at his parents' home in Bradford after his own mother called the police.
You can only imagine what it was like for his parents. A, getting that phone call, I've just killed Ellie and I'm going to kill myself. And then B, he rocks up early hours of the morning and he turns up at their house. That must have been like for them.
His parents would have been in a very difficult position. Irrespective of the crimes that Riley has committed, it's still their boy. So they have a sense of allegiance to him. But at the same time, they did the right thing because as soon as he turned up at their address, the father locked the front door so he couldn't go out and called the police.
I imagine it was very challenging for them to know what to do in terms of this is their son who's done something absolutely horrific. And also just trying to gauge what happened. Is it the truth? What's really happened? Have you really done that? So they must have been really struggling to kind of process and make sense of the things that he was telling them. The only thing that really made sense that they did was they did call the police themselves, which was absolutely the right thing to do. And in doing so, the police came to the house while Riley then escaped out of a bathroom window, which again shows how desperate he was just to evade that detection and evade being questioned by police for what he'd done.
After Riley's arrest, police wasted no time questioning him at the station about the brutal attack on Ellie Moxham the previous evening.
Riley would have been well aware of the severity of what he was doing. You're not going to strangle someone for 2 minutes and not appreciate that you're going to cause significant brain damage to that individual. But he was only prepared to say that he was angry and that he strangled her, but he didn't intend to kill her. So it was then going to be for the investigators, along with the CPS ultimately, to decide whether or not they felt that there was sufficient evidence, based on the medical evidence that would be provided, as to whether or not it was worthy of them to actually charge him with attempted murder.
With Riley in custody, the investigation passes all the collated evidence to the CPS. On the 24th of April 2023, James Riley is brought before a judge at Manchester Crown Court.
After Riley's been arrested, what happens when it goes to court?
Well, it's not as straightforward as you'd think. He didn't plead guilty straight away. The prosecution had built a really strong case. They had a confession to his parents, but unfortunately, Ellie herself didn't really remember the attack.
What evidence did they actually have on Riley?
Well, they had the CCTV, and really importantly, they had that phone call to his parents.
And the warrant card as well left at the scene?
That's right, yeah, he'd left his card there.
Do you think he believes he's not going to get away with this then because he didn't plead guilty?
He drags it out. He really drags it out. First of all, he was charged with GBH, but once they'd seen the extent of Ellie's injuries and all the evidence, that charge was upgraded to attempted murder. That's It's a rare charge. It can be quite hard to prove, so I think he's dragged it out and out and out.
Do you think it made any difference, the fact he was a police officer?
He's got knowledge, hasn't he? He understands how the system works. He would be aware of just what he's up against. Ultimately, though, I think that him dragging that out, I think that was a final act of control over Ellie.
Really?
Yeah, you see it all the time. She's got to get ready for the trial then, and she's got all the stress and all the worry of thinking she's going to have to face him in court while she doesn't really remember what's happened to her.
Is he thinking as a police officer, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. So I'm not going to give you anything. You have to prove that I've done this.
That sounds fair, and that's what I say about that attempted murder charge is it can be very difficult to prove, so he's not coughed to anything.
But even with his police knowledge, this was the end of the line for PC James Riley.
Right just before the trial is about to be heard, he decides then and then, OK, I'll plead. The evidence is so strong against me, I'll plead.
What does he plead?
And he goes for guilty, and that's when he gets convicted.
On the 12th of January 2024, James Riley was sentenced to 16 years for the attempted murder of Ellie Moxham.
Was there any comments the judge made?
Yeah, the judge said that Riley was consumed with uncontrollable anger and that he said he had murderous intent.
Riley was a cop no more. He was a criminal. His actions betrayed the core values that a police officer should hold.
One of the things that a lot of times when police officers get arrested and convicted of crimes, there's always this debate about the public losing trust. I think in this set of circumstances, I'm not necessarily sure that Ellie may have a distrust of police because the work that they did from the moment they realized that she had been attacked to the moment that Riley gets arrested some 4.5 hours later, I'd like to think that she would be complimentary in terms of how the investigation was conducted by the police officers. The relationship that she had with Riley was a completely separate matter. She will hate him for the rest of her life, and so she should. But I don't necessarily think that she would want to feel that police officers shouldn't be trusted.
As for Ellie, she had survived Riley's brutal attack, but it has left a deep and lasting mark.
Ellie has been explicit in how she's felt since the event and has said that she has felt incredibly stressed, that she now suffers with anxiety, night terrors, sleep disorders, that she has trust issues and is having to navigate future relationships because of what's happened to her. This is a significant psychological impact on someone that doesn't just impact them at the moment of the offence or the immediate aftermath, but for the rest of her life.
Was there ever any remorse from Riley?
Well, Riley has shown to be remorseful. He says he's incredibly sorry for what he's done, and he's agreed to never contact Ellie again, which was one of the conditions of his conviction. However, we also know that he's still holding a little bit of that possession and control. So they did actually own a house together, and they owned a joint mortgage, and from what we know, he refuses to relinquish that mortgage so she can sell the property, which shows that he's just holding on to those little threads of control that he may still have behind those bars.
He just can't let go completely, can he?
No.
James Riley's behaviour paints a disturbing picture and raises serious questions about how someone like him could have passed police vetting in the first place.
Looking at Riley and how you've described him, controlling, coercive behaviour, surely them kind of traits means you shouldn't be a police officer.
Exactly, those traits mean they shouldn't be police officers, but there's no test that we do psychological testing in terms of looking for those behaviours. There's nothing in the vetting checks or any sort of misconduct files or anything around loss of control, any sort of behaviour issues, any sort of domineering traits or anything like that. So he'd have quite easily got through a vetting process and carried on his career.
Do you think then that is what attracted him to be a police officer? Because you get to have all that power, and narcissists and control freaks are addicted to power.
It may well be the ability to take away someone's liberty, the uniform, the warrant card, the cuffs, everything that comes with being a police officer, the power. Yes, that may have attracted him. His personality traits may have fell perfectly into that type of a police officer role, definitely.
Riley lost control, and he lost it so badly, he strangled the woman he loved, almost killed her. And even then, he didn't do the right thing and phone an ambulance. He went on the run. This man wasn't fit to be a cop. He didn't deserve to wear the uniform. At least now he's where he belongs, behind bars.